Hi, this is Charles DiMaggio. Welcome back to R for Epidemiologists. In the first part of this screencast introducing objects, I just spoke about what objects actually are, and I mentioned 4 or 5 objects that are of particular interest to epidemiologists. They were vectors, something called a matrix, an array, a list, and a data frame. And in this screencast, I just want to talk about what these objects look like in R, how they are kind of created, just really very briefly and quickly introduce them. So a vector is created with the concatenation operator, which we've seen already. A matrix is created, logically enough, with a matrix function. There is also an array function. There is a list function. And there is a data frame function. The little dot there is important. Now let's take a look at each of these in turn. So let's see. If we were to create a matrix, let's say I want to create a matrix. I'm going to call it let's start with a vector. My vector. And I said we would use the concatenation operator to create a vector. And let's just create a vector. And let's say we just want a series of numbers from 1 to 12. And I could write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could do all of that, but actually there's a shortcut to do that. I'm going to use that. 1, and then the colon operator, and then the number 12 will create the series of numbers from 1 to 12 for me. And that's just a little R shortcut. I'm going to submit that. If I were to check on that, I could do this and submit my vector. Get it back, it's 1 to 12. Just so you know that if you wanted to, like I do this a lot. I do something and then I check it, but I could actually check it as I go along with another quick little trick that you could use in R. If you enclose the entire statement in a parentheses, R will execute it and return it at the same time. So that's just something you could do if you want to save a couple of steps. So there's a matrix, right? It's just the numbers 1 to 12. If I want it as a vector, if I want to create a matrix, let's create something and just call it my matrix. And I could have called this anything I want. I'm calling it my matrix just because I feel like calling it my matrix. I could call it, Kukla, Fran, or Ollie, whatever I want to call it. But in any event, what I'm going to do when I create my matrix, I'm going to use the matrix function. And I'm not going to go into details of that. We're going to go into each of these particular objects in a little bit more detail as we go along. But I need to give it a series of numbers. And why not just give it my vector as a series of numbers? Then I mentioned when I introduced matrices that matrices are really just vectors with some kind of attribute or information or instructions or dimensions of some kind. And one of the ways you can define a matrix is basically by saying, okay, how many rows do I want in my matrix? And I want 2 rows equals 2, and let's submit that. Then if I return my matrix, just to see what it looks like, I see that now what R did was it took my numbers and it basically created a 2-row, 6-column matrix. And notice here, very importantly, because this is going to come up when you start working with them, it populates it column-wise. That might not make a lot of sense to you, and there are ways around that, and you'll see that there's an option in the matrix function called by row, by column. I have to take a look. I think it's by row equal false, but we'll get into that at a certain point. If I want to create an array, and I'm going to call it my array, I use the array function. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to once again submit my series of numbers, my vectors. And I could just put 1 to 12 in here. If I want 1 to 12 in here, if I wanted to, it'll do the same thing. But I've already created this vector object. So let's submit my vector as an argument to the array function. Now I have to give it actually more information, because remember I said that an array is a 3-dimensional matrix. Now the argument is the dimension argument, and the dimension is I want a 2 by 3 by 2 array. I have to use the concatenation operator when I'm listing these dimensions. It's required, and you find this a lot, and that's actually one of the first and most frequent errors that folks get when they start working in R is forgetting this one little C. I've mentioned that before. So the dimensions I want it 2 row by 3 column by 2 third dimension array. And if I do that, I submit it. And if I were to take a look at that, my array, what I get back, at first I have to remember, R demands that you spell things correctly and capitalize them correctly. And now here, look at what I got here. I have the first part of it, and now this actually, if you look over here, this is something we're going to be looking at. If you notice here, right, in my vector, there's the number 1 in brackets. What this indicates is that this is a single dimension, and this is the dimension of it. Now, what I have is, I have the number 1 and then the number 2 followed by a comma. The first part of the indexing, brackets index in R. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that, so we don't need to go into too much detail right now. But as a quick introduction, basically what you're seeing here is that the first dimension is on before the comma, and then the second dimension is after the comma. So here, basically, it's like first dimension, fourth dimension, and if I wanted to, I can get back this number 7. And let me just show you. I can just show you how I do that right away. So I have my matrix, right? I'm just introducing this just for the heck of it. But if I want this number 7, what I can do is I can index my matrix. And so I have the brackets there. I know it's the first row, and that's the first dimension, 1, and it's the fourth column, right? The fourth column. And if I submit that to R, I get the number 7. In the array, there's yet another dimension. There's the third dimension now. So you have first dimension, second dimension, and then there is the third dimension. And here's the first layer of the second dimension and the second layer of the third dimension right here. If I wanted this number, right, if I wanted the number 9, what I would have to submit is something like, well, it's a little bit different. I have to put, there's a different terminology, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But just so you realize that that's what these things are here for. They're here to index every single element of that object right there. If I want to create a list, right, what I can do then is I can have, let's say, a series of letters, okay? And let's just do my letters. And my letters are, I could do this, I could do C, and then do A, B, and let's just do C. C right here. I don't need much more than that. I'm just going to submit that. Now, if I want to create a list, if I want to create an object that includes both my letters, which are letters, and let's say my vector, I can't just combine them because something interesting will happen. Let me just combine them right now, okay? So let's just say my list, right? And I just want to naively combine them together, and I do something like this. My list is concatenate or put together my vector and my letters. I submit that. And now if I look at my list, it's not a list. What I get is another vector, right? But now something weird has happened. All my numbers are in quotation marks. Basically what R has done is coerced everything to a character. And we're going to talk about that as well, what coercion is. What I need to do if I really want to make a list that includes these two things and allows them to retain their attributes, I have to use the list function. And I'm going to say my list and then use list. And then I am going to just copy this right here and then paste it here. And you'll see something different happens here. Now if I look at my list, what you see is I have two sort of like sub-objects, each of which retains their attributes. So now, rather than having a long string of characters, the numbers remain numbers, the characters remain characters. A data frame is essentially like using a list. I'm not going to go into actually doing the data frame right now. We could if we really wanted to. You know what? I could grab a little snippet of code over here just to show you the way a data frame works, so I don't have to spend too much time typing it. But I'm just going to submit this right over here. Let's say I have a series of names, right? Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. I submit that. I have a series of genders, boy, girl, boy. And I have ages that go with them. And if I want to combine them into a data frame, and we've seen data frames already, I would use the data frame function, submit the individual objects that I want to string together or glue together to make a data frame, and call it my dat. I'm going to call it my dat or my data or something like that. And if I submit that, now what I get back is my dat. And I get this nice, neat little data frame that's very familiar to epidemiologists. In any event, that is a quick introduction to objects in R.